Hi, everybody. This is Marlene with Eerie News, and today is Friday, July 22nd, 2022. July 22nd, 2022. And we are off to the races. And the first article is going to be out of Stranger Than Fiction Stories, and it's titled The Imposter. Um, and basically, what it talks about is some people are familiar with this and others are not, but the Romanovs were executed July 1918. The Russian royal family were Tsar Nicholas II, the Tsarina, Alexandra Fedorovna, and their five children, Alexei, Olga, Tatiana, Maria, and Anastasia. In the aftermath of the massacre, there was a cloud of mystery and speculation, and the horror of the family's last few days were kept from the press. There was also doubted the youngest, Anastasia and Alexei, had been killed, and instead were spared. After being moved from house to house, by May of 1918, the royal family was sent to Ipatiev House in Yekaterinburg, which was under Bolshevik control. They called it the House of Special Purposes. It was owned by Yakov Yurovsky, a dedicated Marxist and Bolshevik with close links to the Cheka, the secret police force run by the revolutionaries. The Romanovs spent their last 78 days there. European newspapers reported that Anastasia had somehow escaped the fate that befell her family in the cellar of the House of Special Purpose. The Russian government would not acknowledge the whole family had been shot until 1926, fueling the hopes that all the royal family were executed. The most legendary claimant to being a survivor was a woman who appeared in 1920 saying she was Anastasia. Her name was Anna Anderson, and she was only one of many who claimed to be the last Grand Duchess. It all started February 1920 when a young woman with no identification was pulled from the Landwehr Canal in Berlin. Without anything on her person to lend a clue as to who she was or where she came from, the authorities nicknamed her Madame Unknown and took her to Daldorf Asylum. The mystery deepened when she refused to speak the first 6 months at the asylum. She had scars all over her body, and when she finally spoke, she had a Russian accent. According to the book A Romanov Fantasy, there was another inmate named Clara Pluthert, who had been admitted in 1921 after accusing her neighbors of stealing her money. Prior to World War I, she had lived in Russia. Clara would say to Anna, "Your face is familiar to me. You do not come from ordinary circles." Anna would put her finger to her lips in a shushing motion. In October of that year, Clara showed Madame Unknown a newspaper headline, "The Truth About the Murder of the Tsar." It featured a portrait of the Grand Duchess with the caption, "Is one of the daughters alive?" Clara then went on to tell others that Madame Unknown was Tatiana, even after she was released in January of 1922, despite she had little resemblance to any of the Romanov daughters. Exiles from the Russian court came to the asylum to see the supposed Grand Duchess. Some were convinced she was Tatiana. Others were at least intrigued. However, Baroness Sophie Buxhovden, a lady-in-waiting to Tsarina Alexandra, declared, "She's too short for Tatiana." It was after this that Madame Unknown specified she didn't say she was Tatiana, eventually intimating she was Anastasia, and taking the name of Anna Anderson. She was eventually released from the Daldorf Asylum and went on to meet many of the acquaintances and relatives of the Romanov family. She spent the next few years living in the homes of her supporters, because there were many she convinced of her secret identity. During these years, Lenin refused to confirm the Romanov family had been killed, only that Tsar Nicholas II had been executed. This left the fate of the rest of the family in limbo, officially that is. Despite her supporters, immediate family of the Romanovs who met Anna were convinced that she was not Anastasia. Both aunts, Princess Irene of Prussia and Grand Duchess Olga Alexandrovna, met with Anna, and both came to the conclusion she was not Anastasia. The Dowager Empress refused to meet with Anna, but as painful as it was, she believed the reports that her son and the entire family had been executed. This included her granddaughter Anastasia. There were other telltale signs that Anna Anderson was not Anastasia. She didn't know how to speak English, French, or Russian, all which the real Anastasia knew how to converse in fluently. In 1927, the Grand Duke of Hesse, Tsarina Alexandra's brother, completed an investigation that identified Anna as a factory worker from Poland named Franciszka Szankowska. Despite the proof provided, others continued to support her in Germany and the United States. She was in and out of mental hospitals until she married John Manahan in the United States. The 1956 movie Anastasia, based on Anna's life, earned Ingrid Bergman an Academy Award. In 1979, under the guise of scientific research, geologists located 3 skulls in the area of Yekaterinburg. However, the topic was still delicate and they were reburied until 1990. Yeltsin agreed to a recovery of the remains. Investigators found 9 skeletons in one grave. DNA from the Romanov bones were compared with that from Prince Philip and were found to be a match. They had the bones of Nicholas II, Alexandra, his wife, and 3 of the children. After the bones were assembled, it was found that 2 bodies were missing, those of Alexei's and one of his sisters. They also recovered the remains of 3 servants and the family doctor. Anderson died on February 12, 1984. In 1992, locks of Anna's hair were found in an envelope in a bookstore in Chapel Hill. It was inside a book once owned by Anna's husband, which she had sold. A dealer going through the book caught an envelope with Anastasia's hair written on the outside. He sold it to Susan Burkhart for $20. 6 strands were examined at Penn State. It was concluded the owner of the hair could not be related to the Tsarina. Then another source of Anna's DNA was found with a tissue sample kept at Martha Jefferson Hospital, which was retained due to a routine surgery she underwent there. The sample was sent to the British scientists who had tested the Romanov bones. A blood sample was taken from Karel Mauker, a relative of Franziska Schankowska. In 1994, his results were that Anna Anderson was not Anastasia, and there was a 100% match to Karel Mauker. It was revealed that Anna's real identity was Franziska Schankowska, as proven in 1927. In 1998, the royal remains were interred in St. Peter's and Paul's Cathedral in St. Petersburg, where Russia's Tsars had historically been laid to rest. In 2007, Sergei Plotnikov, an amateur historian, came upon a small hollow covered with nettles. He belonged to a group who would spend their summer weekends looking for the lost Romanovs. He, along with a companion, started to dig and found bone fragments, which included a piece of pelvis and a skull. By the size, they could tell it came from a child. In total, 44 different fragments were found. They also found pieces of Japanese ceramics bottles used to carry sulfuric acid poured on the Romanovs' corpses. Archaeologists confirmed they belonged to Prince Alexei and Princess Anastasia. The site was 6 miles north of Yekaterinburg, where the other bodies were discovered. It appeared to match the location described in the memoirs of Yurovsky, the Bolshevik executioner in charge of the Romanovs' captivity. He described where the bodies of 9 victims were doused with sulfuric acid and buried along the road, and Alexei's body and one of the sisters' bodies was burned and left in a pit nearby. And you know what? This is incredible, because if you look at these pictures, for those of you watching the video, this woman, Anna Anderson, or Francisca, whatever her real name was, she does not look at all like any of these Grand Duchesses. Not in the least. Not in the least. And basically, the time between they were killed, which was 1918, and this woman being fished out of a canal is 2 years. Because you're thinking, well, if maybe a lot of years go by, you say, well, maybe this was a young teenage girl and she's looks different because so many years have gone by, 10, 20 years. But in 2 years, you could tell. And I think it's incredible that there were people that, I don't know, I guess hope fuels foolishness. Because you could tell that this, and to boot, she was crazy. She got away with it for a long time. And she inspired a movie. There you go. Okay, the next article is out of Life Science. And the article is titled, Unlucky Creatures that Enter Rare Red Sea Brine Pools Are Immediately Stunned to Death. Rare deep-sea brine pools discovered in the Red Sea may hold clues to environmental upheavals in the region that span millennia and could even shed light on the origins of life on Earth, a new study finds. Deep-sea brine pools are extraordinarily salty or hypersaline lakes that form on the seafloor. They are among the most extreme environments on Earth, yet despite their exotic chemistry and complete lack of oxygen, These rare pools teem with life and may offer insights on how life on Earth began and how life could evolve and thrive on water-rich worlds other than our own. Our current understanding is that life originated on Earth in the deep sea, almost certainly in anoxic without oxygen conditions. Study lead author Stan Perkis, a professor and chair of the Department of Marine Geosciences at the University of Miami, told Live Science. Deep-sea brine pools are a great analog for the early Earth, and despite being devoid of oxygen and hypersaline, are teeming with a rich community of so-called extremophile microbes. Studying this community hence allows a glimpse into the sort of conditions where life first appeared on our planet, and might guide the search for life on other water worlds in our solar system and beyond. These pools might also yield microbial discoveries that could contribute to the development of novel medicines, Perkis added. Molecules with antibacterial and anti-cancer properties have previously been isolated from deep-sea microbes living in brine pools, he said. Scientists know of just a few dozen deep-sea brine pools in the entire world, which range in size from a few thousand square feet to about a square mile. Only 3 bodies of water are known to host deep-sea brine pools: the Gulf of Mexico, the Mediterranean Sea, and the Red Sea. The Red Sea possesses the highest known number of deep-sea brine pools. They are thought to arise from dissolving pockets of minerals deposited during the Miocene epoch, which is about 23 million to 5.3 million years ago, when the sea level in the region was lower than it is today. Until now, all known deep-sea brine pools in the Red Sea were located at least 15.5 miles offshore. Now scientists have discovered the first such pools in the Gulf of Aqaba, a northern pocket of the Red Sea where the submerged salty lake lies just 1.25 miles from shore. The researchers discovered the pools during a 2020 expedition on board the marine exploration organization Ocean X's research vessel, Ocean Explorer. The expedition investigated the Red Sea coastline of Saudi Arabia, an area which has so far received little attention, Perkis said. Using a remotely operated underwater vehicle, the scientists discovered the pools 1.1 miles beneath the surface of the Red Sea, naming them the Neon Brine Pools after the Saudi development company that funded the research. The biggest pool measures about 107,000 square feet in diameter, while 3 smaller pools measured less than 107 square feet in diameter. At this great depth, there is ordinarily not much life on the seabed, Perkis said. However, the brine pools are a rich oasis of life. Thick carpets of microbes support a diverse suite of animals. Most interesting among these were the fish, shrimp, and eels that appeared to use the brine to hunt. Perkis said the brine is devoid of oxygen, so any animal that strays into the brine is immediately stunned or killed. He explained the predators that lurk near the brine feed on the unlucky, he noted. The proximity of these pools to the coast means they could have accumulated runoff from the land, incorporating terrestrial minerals into their chemical makeup. They could therefore potentially serve as unique archives, preserving traces of tsunamis, floods, and earthquakes in the Gulf of Aqaba across thousands of years. Perkis said, because the brine lacks oxygen, the pool keeps out the usual animals that live in and on the seabed, such as burrowing shrimp, worms, and mollusks. Ordinarily, these animals bioturbate or churn up the seabed, disturbing the sediments that accumulate there, Perkis said. Not so with the brine pools. Here, any sedimentary layers that settle to the bed of the brine pool remain exquisitely intact. Core samples that the researchers extracted from the newfound brine pools represent an unbroken record of past rainfall in the region stretching back more than 1,000 years, plus records of earthquakes and tsunami, Perkis said. Their findings suggest that in the past 1,000 years, major floods from serious rain occurred about once every 25 years, and tsunamis take place about once every 100 years. They need to check when they had their last tsunami. These findings regarding the risk of tsunamis and other disasters may have very important lessons for the massive infrastructure projects that are presently being built on the coastline of the Gulf of Aqaba. Perkis said, whereas the coastline of the Gulf of Aqaba has traditionally been sparsely populated, it is now urbanizing at an astounding rate. In the future, we aim to work with the other countries that border the Gulf of Aqaba to widen the assessment of earthquake and tsunami risk. Perkis said, in addition, we hope to return to the brine pools with more sophisticated coring equipment to try to extend our reconstruction back beyond 1,000 years deeper into antiquity. Interesting because, Yeah, you know what? You see animals that make use of, they hunt, right, I imagine, on the perimeter of these brine pools. Plus, also, if they're charting, a cycle or a pattern of tsunamis or what they call severe rainfall, that's something to look at. That's, yeah, especially if you're building maybe a lot of buildings in that area. The last thing you want is for them to be taken out by a tsunami or not built with a certain coating. Okay, this other one, this was like, this is from the Standard, and it's titled "Woman Lay Dead at Home for 2.5 years After Housing Trust Inaction and Police Blunder." This is incredible. A woman lay dead in her London home for more than 2.5 years after the Met Police wrongly suggested she was safe and well, and a housing trust failed to investigate, an inquest has heard. Sheila Cialone is believed to have collapsed and died in the hallway of her Peckham flat in August of 2019, shortly after telling her doctor about wheezing and breathing difficulties. Neighbors grew concerned about her safety when she was not seen for months. Her post stacked up high, and a dreadful smell filled the hallway outside her flat. However, her body was not discovered until February this year, when police forced entry to the home. When police officers were called out twice to Miss Celone's home twice in October of 2020, they got no answer but decided they did not have the lawful power to force entry. A message was then wrongfully relayed to the Met by the Peabody Trust, Miss Celone's landlord, that she had been spoken to and was safe and well in an inquest that Southwark's coroner's court heard. Something smells fishy. Something smells fishy there. Peabody knew Mrs. Salone had stopped paying her rent the previous summer, but took no other steps to investigate. After receiving the erroneous police message, the hearing was told. Miss Salone, who was 58 when she died, was eventually found after another 16 months when neighbors heard her balcony door banging repeatedly, and police did force their way into her home in February this year. Her skeletal remains could only be identified through dental records, and a pathologist was unable to determine exactly when and how she died. In a tragic exploration of the lengthy period before Miss Salone's death was discovered, it emerged that Peabody had cut off her gas supply in June of 2020 during the first pandemic wave after failing to make contact. Voicemails and emails from the trust went unanswered, and Miss Salone had not paid her rent since August of 2019. Despite the lack of contact, and while she lay dead and decomposing on the floor, Peabody started taking rent payments out of her universal credit benefit in March 2020. Neighbors say they tried repeatedly to raise the alarm without success, while a much-delayed independent report into Peabody's actions is due to be published this week. Something went wrong, said Coroner Dr. Julian Morris. There was a delay in raising any flags. There was no real communication as between rent, gas, and other neighborhood manager teams for someone who had until August 2019 and for over 5 years been, in effect, a model tenant. The lack of rent payment, non-communication with all three departments, and the necessity to cap off her gas supply didn't trigger any increased suspicion that something might be wrong. The coroner added, to lie undetected for in all likelihood over 2 years is difficult to fathom in 2022. Ash Fox, deputy chief executive at Peabody, struggled to contain her emotions and wiped away a tear as she gave evidence to the inquest on Thursday, saying everyone was devastated. She said the independent review ordered after Miss Salone's death had made 37 recommendations that are being implemented, while efforts are being made to contact residents at all its properties to check on their welfare. Individual processes were followed successfully, she said of Miss Salone's case, but they were perhaps followed in silo. Dots could have been joined up sooner, and we could have done more to raise the alarm more quickly. She said the policy around cutting off gas supplies has been changed, and more staff members are being taken on to act as liaisons for residents. D.S. Scott Fisher, a Met police detective, called out after Miss Salone's body was eventually discovered near to the front door of the one-bedroom home, said he found an immaculate home and no signs of a burglary or robbery. He could identify blue pajamas and a white top that she had been wearing, and told the inquest he could see remaining parts of her hair and a gold tooth. I came to the conclusion, in my opinion, that she passed away around August 2019, he said. The balcony door was open, the heating was switched off, indicating to me warmer months. Her prescription medication ended around summer of 2019. There was a receipt in her handbag for a visit to the shops in August of 2019. When we look in her fridge, the shortest shelf life article was a dessert partially eaten, which expired in August of 2019. I formed the opinion that this was when she died. He made contact with Miss Salone's half-brother Victor, who said her father was unknown and her mother had already died. The detective explained that following concerns from a neighbor about a bad smell, a police officer visited the block of flats on October 15, 2020. Speaking to the officer later, D.S. Fisher said the piece had a vague memory of the incident, believed there was no bad smell, and concluded did not have lawful grounds to force entry into the home. A second officer was called out by Peabody 6 days later on October 21, 2020, and came to the same conclusion. DCI Amanda Mawhinney was put in charge of investigating after the discovery of the body on February 18, 2022, and reviewed the way the Met had handled the incidents and communicated with Peabody. She said there was confusion over the police airwaves after the second officer's welfare check, leading to an inaccurate record being made about Miss Salone's safety. When a second operator spoke to Peabody later, the message was then passed back that she was safe and well, the inquest heard. DCI Mawhinney said a series of recommendations have been made, including on the thoroughness of police welfare checks, while the call handler who made the inaccurate record would have been referred for professional standard investigation if he had not since retired. Coroner Dr. Julian Morris returned a narrative verdict recording the cause of death as uncertain. He recorded the date of death as February 18, 2022, when the body was found. Okay, talk about dropping the ball or passing the ball. Or number one, I'm thinking, number one, it's very sad to think that this woman had no family. I can understand neighbors, but no family to call up the police and say, I haven't heard from my sister, my cousin, my aunt, my whatever, and call them the next day. Have you gone? Well, I'll meet you there. Why can't? That's number one. Number two, the miscommunications. I can tell you I have a very good suspicion. Whoever was being sent out there did not want to be the one to open up a place and find a stinky, putrefying body. It's that simple. It's like, nah, I'll pass it. She's dead. And I'm wondering why her doctor, who she had the last contact with as I'm wheezing and I'm having difficulty, and hopefully he would be familiar, would think that his patient never returned, would have called police and said, you know what, I spoke to this lady, I spoke to my patient, and I'm concerned. I mean, between that and neighbors, and you know what, I totally believe that what they're saying, that the neighbors tried repeatedly to get somebody to go out there. That's very, very sad. That's very troubling also. Very troubling. Okay, let's move on. This is out of RNS Religion News Service, and it's titled Mormon Founder Joseph Smith's Photo Discovered by Descendant After Nearly 180 Years. All right. Marooned in their homes, many Americans made the best of the early days of the pandemic by sorting through old boxes of family artifacts. One Saturday morning in March of 2020, Dan Larson and his wife were doing just that when they discovered the world's only verified photographic image of Mormonism's founder, Joseph Smith Jr. Larson, 79, is a great-great-grandson of Smith, who was killed by a mob near Nauvoo, Illinois in 1844. Among the effects passed down to Larson was a pocket watch that bore the initials of his great-grandfather, Joseph Smith III, the prophet's oldest son and founder of the reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, now called Community of Christ. There was also a second object, a locket, that resembled a pocket watch. When Larson inherited the locket shortly before his mother's death in 1992, its finial was bent and he was not able to open it, so he put it away for safekeeping. While writing out pandemic shutdowns in 2020, he and his wife embarked on a project of sorting through items collected from both sides of the family. I was a little hesitant about prying the locket open, Larson told the news service in a phone interview, but he was soon able to wrest it open and shine a penlight inside. Expecting to find a watch face, he was stunned to see the face of a man. In my mind, there was no question who it was, Larson said. He felt sure he was staring into the eyes of Joseph Smith Jr. For years, historians had speculated about the possibility that a photographic image of Joseph Smith was out there somewhere, based on claims various Smith relatives had made and an advertisement from the 1850s. Larson felt certain he'd found such a photo, and because the locket had been closed up tight for decades, protected from light, the image was still remarkably clear. What followed was more than 2 years of verification. Larson called his nephew, the historian and Community of Christ apostle Lachlan Mackay, to help him assemble experts and test the hypothesis that the image was that of Smith. Mackay joined forces with historian Ron Romig, the retired chief archivist for Community of Church. In an article published on the John Whitmer Historical Association Journal, the two historians detail the steps they took to authenticate the daguerreotype. They hired facial recognition experts to compare the daguerreotype to Smith's death mask. The company reported back that 19 of 21 measured features matched within a 95% confidence interval. Another expert compared the daguerreotype's facial features with those seen in the most famous oil painting of Joseph Smith, noting that the hairline and other features were matched and that both images showed the same distinctive frown lines near the left eyebrow. Meanwhile, Mackay and Romig tried to verify the find through historical research. Now that they knew the long-rumored daguerreotype was housed inside a locket, they realized that it had in fact been hiding in plain sight all this time. The locket showed up on prominent Smith family women throughout the years. Mackay said Bertha Madison Smith, who married one of Joseph Jr. and Emma's sons, wore it in a portrait in 1869. In 1875, a granddaughter wore it in her wedding portrait, in which the locket was hanging from a chain. It's believed that the locket remained in Emma's possession until her death in 1879, and as she loaned it to female family members for special occasions, it eventually made its way to the family of the RLDS prophet Fred M. Smith, Joseph Jr.'s grandson and Larson's grandfather. Mackay and Romig also investigated links to the likely photographer, a man named Lucian Foster, a Mormon branch president in New York City in 1839 when daguerreotypes first reached U.S. shores. Foster was an expert in the craft by the time he moved to Nauvoo to join the fellow Mormons in April of 1844. Since he rented a room in the prophet's home, he had close proximity to the Smith family. Experts think it's during that brief period of May or early June of 1844 that Smith had Foster take his picture. Now it's time for the photo story to be told. Larson kept his discovery of the daguerreotype under wraps until the verification process. Few people, other than the experts, have seen the image. He and Mackay are planning to give a presentation about the daguerreotype at the Smith family reunion in Nauvoo in early August, telling other Smith descendants about the image's history and the way it was passed through the family. David Howlett, a professor of religion at Smith's College and the author of Kirtland Temple, the biography of a shared Mormon sacred space, got a preview of the presentation and believes the evidence is strong. I think that they've been very careful and that they make a convincing, plausible case for this, he said. Larson would not say definitively what would happen to the locket and the Smith image next. I probably won't speculate on that right now, but I have to say that I feel that the original artifact needs to be in Salt Lake with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which I am now a member of, he said. He grew up in the RLDS church but converted to the Utah-based LDS church about 8 years ago. The few people who have seen the image so far have been struck by Smith's eyes. If you look at the picture in those eyes, it's mesmerizing, Larson said. Mackay agreed. I think for generations, people have wondered what Joseph looked like. Where was the charisma that people talked about? What was it about this man that caused people to follow him through incredible difficulty through the years? I think I can see through the eyes what might have induced those people to follow him. Parley P. Pratt and others talk about Joseph Smith's eyes as gaze, the way he could almost look right through you, and I think I see that. Okay, and I think that's so interesting. The reason why I looked at that is lately you find these really, how can I say it, valuable, and when I mean valuable, not strictly just for monetary purposes, valuable artifacts in plain sight. Like, this one lady who discovered a first century Roman bust or head in a Goodwill, and she buys it for $29. Sometimes I agree. Sometimes things are hidden in plain sight. So there you go. All right, let's go back to Stranger Than Fiction stories. And this is, we're going to go into true crime, my favorite. And this is titled, Why Was He Paroled? In January of 1980, Helen Przinski, 21, a a young news intern, was found dead in a field in the ranch lands off Daniels Park Road in Inglewood, Colorado. Her murder would go unsolved for close to 4 decades. She was a senior at Wheaton College and had started working at the radio station KHOW a little over 2 weeks before. The coroner determined she died of multiple stab wounds to the back, and she was sexually assaulted several times. Her hands were bound behind her back, and she was naked from the waist down. Helen would normally take a bus to her home in Inglewood and from there walk to her uncle and aunt's home where she was staying. Police suspected this is where the killer abducted her. Investigators believed there was a link between Pruszynski's murder and 2 other slayings in the Denver metropolitan area, but it would be many years before they could connect the dots as to who the perpetrator was. The police said the crime resembled one in 1968 and the other in 1970. 3 weeks before Helen's murder, a woman was raped in the same area. Another woman reported that a man attempted to grab her as she was getting off the bus. In May 1994, authorities were looking at Kenyon Battles Tollerton as a suspect. Police believe he was responsible for the death of Sissy Foster, 14, whose partially clad body was found in September of 1993 in a remote area of Denver. Like Pruszynski, she had been stabbed various times and raped. In 1976, he tried to abduct Janelle Shepard from a mall's parking lot by hiding in the backseat of her car. See, that right there is like horror story stuff. Only an intervention by a good Samaritan saved Shepard, and he was arrested. It was believed she was his only victim to survive. Tollerton was a suspect in the murder of Holly Andrews, 16, who disappeared on December 26, 1976, after leaving her mother's home in Littleton. Her body was found the next day in Bakersfield, Colorado. He was suspected in other stabbing death of teenage girls in Colorado. In 1980, Donna Wogg's half-clad body was found in a field in Arapahoe County. It was already decomposing. She lived in an apartment across an alley from where Tollerton lived. He became a suspect and was charged with first-degree murder for the rape and strangulation of the 22-year-old waitress. He pled guilty to second-degree murder in 1981. The prosecutors were seeking the death penalty if it was taken to trial. He was on probation for a 1976 abduction of Janelle Shepard. Prior to this, Tollerton had been sentenced to 10 years in Leavenworth federal prison for a federal conviction on 2 gun possession charges. The DA sought the maximum 24-year sentence, saying that based on Tollerton's criminal history, he was dangerous. Judge Ken Stewart said there was no absolute proof of Tollerton's guilt and sentenced him only with 10 years. He was paroled in 1991. Within 2 years, he killed Sissy Foster. Police arrested him when they found a link between DNA taken from Foster's body and a blood sample taken from Tollerton when he was serving a sentence in prison in 1980. In 1994, he was sentenced to life plus 48 years for the murder of Sissy Foster. By 1999, authorities once more tried to match sparse DNA taken from Pruszynski's murder scene. So far, tests had been inconclusive, but there was hope that with new advances and an expanded DNA database, there would be a match to her attacker. It wasn't until 2019 that a match was made between semen taken from the crime scene to James Curtis Clanton, formerly known as Curtis Allen White, of Lake Butler, Florida. He was convicted in 1975 of raping a woman at knife point inside her Arkansas home. He forced the woman to drive him to a bus stop in Little Rock and then released her. She went to the police and he was arrested within the hour. He was sentenced to 30 years in prison with 10 years suspended sentence and was released on parole after just 4 years. It was then he killed Helen Pruszynski. At the time of his arrest, he worked as a truck driver, and after being surveilled for a week, he was arrested and extradited to Colorado. The match to Clanton was made via genetic links to family members who submitted DNA. Then the police were tasked with getting a DNA sample from Clanton, and finally obtained it from a beer mug he was seen using at a bar. Only Helene's sister was left alive from the immediate family to welcome the news of the arrest. In 2020, Clanton, 63, pled guilty to the murder charge and was sentenced to life in prison. He told investigators after meeting with his parole officer, he decided to take a woman to have sex with. He said he saw Pruszynski get off the bus, abducted her, and then raped and killed her. He was 22 at the time and had moved to Colorado only a year before the murder. He worked as a landscaper and lived only blocks from the bus stop Pruszynski would use to get home. Clanton looked very similar to a sketch produced in 1980, from a hypnotized witness description to a booking photo of Clanton in 1998. Clanton was not charged with sexual assault since the statute of limitations had expired, and there are suspicions that he was behind a series of reported attacks in the area around that time. A family friend of Clanton said he knew him well, and that Clanton was guarded about his past, and lied as to the reason why he had gone to prison in Arkansas. He said he got into a fist fight over a girl, kicked a man in the chest, and unintentionally killed him. This same friend said that Clanton lived a quiet life and was not known to be violent. Okay. In 1998 and 2001, Clanton was arrested on domestic violence charges. There was a delay in actually arresting Clanton since the initial possible match through a genealogy website exposed a convoluted family tree. Police had to wade through 3,000 family members in order to narrow their focus. His mother used 6 last names over her lifetime and had 5 children with 2 different men. Early in his life, Clanton used the name Curtis Allen White and lived with his father as an infant, but was raised by an aunt and uncle until he was 13 years old. He was a chronic runaway and ended up in foster care. He would tell authorities he didn't know who his mother was and said his uncle was his father. He started using the name James Curtis Clanton in 1982. Clanton's brother had a lengthy criminal history, and at some point, police had to make sure he was not the one they were looking for. As per prison records, Clanton remains incarcerated at Bent County Correctional Facility in Las Animas, Colorado. He will be eligible for parole in January of 2040. So much heartbreak could have been avoided if Clanton and Tollerton would have been sentenced appropriately and served their entire term behind bars. One wonders if whoever decided to parole either of these men ever slept soundly after this terrible decision. And you know what? I believe in second chances. I believe in parole, but not for somebody. It depends on what type of crime. If you look at their arrest records, are they violent? Are they ultra violent? And in this case, both of these men, Clanton and the other guy, Tollerton, both went on to commit horrific crimes while they were on parole. So that's my take on it. But another case solved eventually by DNA, but it's very sad because, like they said, this girl Brzezinski, all her family died with the exception of her brother. Everybody had passed away. Her parents, everybody went, died without knowing, who killed my daughter, my niece, whatever. It's a horrible thing. All right, let's get on to the other story. And this one is out of France 24 and is titled Ancient Siberian Dogs Relied on Humans for Seafood Diets. As early as 7,400 years ago, Siberian dogs had evolved to be far smaller than wolves, making them more dependent on humans for food, including sea mammals and fish trapped below the ice, a new study showed. Robert Losey of the University of Alberta, who led the research published in Science Advances, said the findings help explain the growth in the early dog population as people put them to work for hunting, herding, and sledding. The long-term changes in dog diets have really been oversimplified, explaining that prior work had focused only on 2 main ideas to explain how dogs transitioned from wolves, a process that began some 40,000 years ago. The first of these was that friendlier wolves approached human camps during the Ice Age to scavenge for meat, eventually became isolated from their wild counterparts, and were then intentionally bred into dogs. The second was that some dogs evolved a better capacity to digest starches following the agricultural revolution, which is why some modern dog breeds have more copies of the AMY2B gene that creates pancreatic amylase. To study ancient dog diets in more depth, Losey and colleagues analyzed the remains of about 200 ancient dogs from the past 11,000 years and a similar number of ancient wolves. We had to go to collections all over Siberia. We analyzed those bones, took samples of the collagen, and analyzed the protein in labs, he said. Based on the remains, the team made statistical estimates for body sizes. They also used a technique called stable isotope analysis to generate dietary estimates. They discovered that dogs of 7 to 8,000 years ago were already quite small, meaning that they just couldn't do the things that most wolves were doing, said Losey. This in turn led to greater dependence on humans for food, and reliance on small prey and scavenging rather than prey bigger than themselves, which wolves hunt. We see that dogs have marine diets, meaning they're eating fish, shellfish, seals, and sea lions, which they can't easily get themselves, he said. Ancient dogs were found to be eating fish in areas of Siberia where the lakes and rivers are frozen over for 7 to 8 months of the year. Wolves of the time and today were hunting in packs and mainly eating various species of deer. These new diets brought dogs both benefits and challenges. Beneficial because they could access stuff from humans, and those are oftentimes easy meals. But it came with a cost of all these new diseases and problems, like not enough nutrition, said Losey. Well, the new bacteria and parasites they were exposed to could have helped some adapt. Some dog populations might not have survived. Most of the first dogs of the Americas died out for unclear reasons and were replaced by European dogs, though it's not thought colonization was to blame. Those dogs that did survive acquired more diverse gut microbiomes, helping them further in digesting more carbohydrates associated with life with humans. What if it was a runt? Smaller dog, like they said, you know, tags along, follows around maybe a group of people. Maybe he's a puppy. All you need is a this is a this is funny. I laughed when I read this. This is out of WAFB.com and it's titled Murder Suspect Claims Victim Summoned Bigfoot to Kill Him. By the way, I laughed. It's not somebody got killed here. But still, it's like you hear so many different stories about Bigfoot and cryptids, but I hadn't heard about this one. This was a new one. Um An Oklahoma man is facing a murder charge after he allegedly killed his friend. Deputies said he claimed the victim had summoned Bigfoot to go after and kill him. The Pontotoc County Sheriff's Department responded to a call about an alleged killing Saturday afternoon just outside of the city limits of Ada, Oklahoma. Deputies arrived at the scene to 53-year-old suspect Larry Sanders admitting to a family member that he had killed his friend Jimmy Knighton. The Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation said that Sanders and Knighton had been noodling or hand fishing in the river when a confrontation ensued. Sanders allegedly struck and strangled Knighton. As part of the investigation, the sheriff's department was unable to uncover a motive. Appeared to be under the influence of something, so his statement was that Mr. Knighton had summoned Bigfoot to come and kill him, and that's why he had to kill Mr. Knighton, Sheriff John Christian said. Such agencies said and the sheriff's department weren't able to locate the victim's body until Sunday afternoon. Investigators are now working to uncover proof of the alleged crime. It always makes it easier. You still have to prove all the elements of the crime and what the suspect is telling you. You have to prove that that's actually what happened. Sanders is charged with first-degree murder. The sheriff says the death penalty is the harshest punishment the prosecution could push for in the case. Okay, and then you ask yourself, was this man really mental illness or under some type of drug that he really did think that his friend actually sent Bigfoot to kill him? Or after the fact, he said, I better come up with something way out there so that I can use the insanity plea kind of deal, and that thing about Bigfoot, that'll do it. Let me look real quick, if there's any follow up to find out. You know, see, because sometimes I'm very curious because they don't follow up. Like, what was the cause of? Well, did he really strangle him? Like, what happened? Yeah, no. No, I'll follow up on it because I think that's either the guy really is nuts or that was some type of. And then you're thinking this is a friend, you know, and you're thinking did the guy that got killed ever wonder, hey, my friend here, there's something wrong with him, you know, at some point that you think, okay, you know, we're not going to go out fishing today. How's that? All right. Next story is out of Wales Online, and it's titled Gran Scared to Death as Grave Robbing Badgers Dump Human Skull and Bones in Her Garden. And the elderly Gran was left spooked over a human skull and dozens of bones were dumped in her garden by grave-wrecking badgers. Ann Mathers, 88, called police after making the grim discovery, which also saw several femurs and jawbones scattered in her flower beds. The Gran, who has lived in her end terrace house in Dudley, West Midlands for more than 60 years, was said to be scared to death by the grave-robbing critters. She first found the skull last July and called police, who initially sealed her home off as a potential crime scene. Officers then discovered the culprit was a colony of badgers dragging the remains into her garden from a nearby cemetery. It emerged the animals were getting access to the graveyard via a public footpath running between the cemetery and Anne's house. Her family have appealed to the Dudley Metropolitan Borough Council for help, but they can only relocate the badgers when this year's breeding season is over. Anne's daughter, Lorraine Lloyd, 60, said, "This problem has been going on for a year now. My mom is just sick of it." The badgers are tunneling under the graves, and when they come across one which has collapsed, they drag the bones out and dump them in Mom's garden. They're basically fly tipping human remains all over my mom's lawn, and there's nothing we can do about it. Anne, whose home backs onto the graveyard at Providence Baptist Church, first noticed bones being left outside her home last year. Lorraine, a civil servant, added, "I was on holiday when my mom called me in hysterics, saying she'd found a human skull in the bushes. I didn't know what on earth was going on, but when I went over there, I couldn't believe my eyes. There were human remains everywhere. We called police and they sealed it off as a crime scene. I don't know if they thought it could be a possible murder victim, but pretty soon they found lots of holes in the garden where the badgers had been digging through." Lorraine, who has 3 children and lives near her mom and Dudley, said her mom had found numerous bones over the last 12 months. She said, "Behind my mom's house is a gully, and then it's the graveyard. One night, she came down and found 7 badgers on her lawn. She just wants the badgers gone, but apparently the council can't move them until the breeding season is over." It must be very distressing for people if they found their relatives' remains were being dug up. Councillor Shah Salim, cabinet member for the highway, said, "As badgers are a protected species, we are in the process of obtaining the services of a qualified ecologist to help us further." This lady's going to get a lot of bones on her yard, I believe. Councillor Adam Ashton, who represents the Woodsetton ward, said, "I work as a paramedic, so I'm not easily shocked, but the sight of so many human remains within the public right-of-way and in people's back gardens stopped me in my tracks. I hope urgent work can now be undertaken to strengthen the boundary with the churchyard and prevent any further burrowing into the public area. We completely understand that badgers have a protected status in law, particularly in the breeding season, and the council finds itself in a difficult position, but we hope this disrespectful situation can be resolved and the right-of-way reopened for public use. It is quite distressing for our constituents." Well, we have to get an ecologist, and let me tell you, that's what I'm saying. At the beginning, when you read about it, you're going, that's unusual, but having to live under those that you walk out and here's, you got these pieces of bones or a skull, yeah, after a while that gets old. So anyway, guys, I hope that you like this edition of Eerie News. So come back soon. I will have more unusual news, weird news, sometimes comic news, sometimes serious, but always interesting. Till next time.